My shoes untied? It's not my shoes, is it? The footage that you're looking at right now is from a drone that can do something that almost no FPV drone can do, even though camera drones have had this trick in their repertoire basically since they were invented. And when you find out what this trick is, you might be a tiny bit underwhelmed. And that's why I'm starting out by showing you this footage. Because if you're an experienced FPV pilot, you may be looking at some of this footage and going, wait a minute. What's going on here? You see, there is something about FPV drones that is so baked into our DNA that as FPV pilots, we almost don't even think about it. And in fact, if it ever changed, we might even think our drone was like broken. And that is the up tilt angle of our cameras. The cameras of FPV drones have a fixed up tilt angle. We fix the angle of the FPV camera and we attach the GoPro and we fix the angle of the GoPro. And then in order to frame a shot, we tilt the drone forward and we tilt the drone backward and we angle and tilt the drone. And that's what makes an FPV drone. But it is also a limitation because it means that in order to change the shot, we also have to change the speed and direction that the drone is going. And wouldn't it be nice if we could actually do those two things independently? And that brings us to the product that we're looking at today. This is the Medlin drone camera gimbal. And you could kind of see that it mounts the FPV camera and it mounts the HD camera on this gimbal, which is capable of changing angle up and down. And it can do that not only like just by flipping a switch or pressing a button, it can literally do it with a head tracker. So you can adjust that angle while you fly dynamically in real time, and it opens up all kinds of creative possibilities. If we go back to Josh Medlin, he's the creator of this. If we go back to his sample footage, you can see shots where he goes from looking straight down at an object that he's chasing, and then he kind of drops down, or maybe he speeds up, or he gets around. He is able to keep that object in view as it changes speed, which is just something you can't do with a fixed camera angle. So what we're going to do in today's video is we're going to mount this gimbal on my iFlight Chimera Pro and get it all set up. And in case you're thinking, Bardwell, I've seen you. Didn't you do a setup video with a Medlin drone gimbal in the past? Yes, but no. Number one, I didn't actually install it on the quad. And number two, this quad's running iNav, not Betaflight. So even if you've seen me do this on Betaflight, we're going to have an iNav setup video and learn how servos work with iNav. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Before we install the Medlin drone gimbal on our aircraft, let's just take a closer look at what comes out of the box. And I do need to say before we get into this, this gimbal was pre-assembled and delivered to me exactly as you see it by Josh Medlin. And if you want to buy one, you can buy one from him and he'll do the exact same thing for you. In the interest of transparency, I should tell you I didn't buy this. He sent it to me because obviously the promotional value of me making this video is very high for him. So in full transparency, I disclose that. But if you have more time than money, or if you're just interested in the process, all of the parts that you need to build one of these are available from Josh Medlin's website, and you don't have to give him any money. You can 3D print all the things, you can source all the individual parts separately, and you can build it yourself if that's what you want to do. And at its heart, the Medlin drone appears pretty simple, deceptively simple, I would say. We've got a servo. And the servo is driving this wheel, which is connected to the gimbal camera mount via a belt, and it can change angle. I know it's not super good to do this to a servo, but I just want you to see. You can change angle from up to down. There's a 3D printed mount here. This is for the DJI-03. Thankfully, that's the camera that's in my Chimera. And there's a GoPro mount right here. And it's really cool that the FPV camera and the GoPro follow the same angle. So as you tilt up or tilt down, your framing won't change. Of course, that's kind of required, but it may not be obvious if you were to just start designing one of these from scratch. I do want to point out that this is far from the first revision of Medlin's gimbal. In fact, this one was sent to me a few months ago and I just haven't gotten around to assembling it yet. I'm willing to bet it's changed since he sent me this one. He's continually revising it. One of the biggest changes he's made is replacing a traditional servo control arm with this belt system. And the beauty of this is that if you do crash your drone and this does take a hit, instead of bending the control arm, it'll just maybe slip a little bit on the belt, but it won't actually damage anything, and you can easily reset it. In addition, changing the angle is as simple as removing the belt and setting the angle here. So if you want to change, instead of it going from up to down, you want it to go more up or less down, you can easily adjust how this gear keys into this belt. I can't help but notice that the rear screws are not accessible while the servo is inside the print. So I may need to push the servo out of the print so I can install it and then push the servo back in. Not the end of the world, but mildly annoying. I guess there's not really, the size of the servo just is what it is. Before I start taking this apart, I think I'm going to tilt this all the way up so that when I put it back on, I can key it the right way. And then I don't see how I'm going to get this off other than to just remove the screw. Doesn't look like the belt wants to come off any other way. It seems like when I turn this screw turns and vice versa. So maybe I have to do both of them at the same time. I'm trying not to lose the order of the screws and washers and everything. And now, there we go. That will come off very easily. Great. And then this has to come out. Got that plug out. And now it feels like this will slide out. I just push this way. Yes. And with that being done, now we can mount this on the aircraft. The first thing I'm going to do is install the 5-volt regulator for the servo in the aircraft. And in order to do that, I'm going to need a source of battery voltage. The most obvious thing to do would be to solder to the ESC. This, of course, is battery voltage, but as you can see, that would require a little bit of disassembly of the aircraft and be kind of annoying. Instead, I have found a VBAT and ground pad here on the flight controller, and that's going to be just fine. Powering the servo off the flight controller is fine. We just don't want to rely on the 5-volt regulator on the servo being a weak link. In this case, we're just passing voltage through to the flight controller. And frankly, if the flight controller loses battery voltage, then the whole quad's going to fall out of the air anyway. So we haven't really created an additional failure point. So we'll solder the VBAT and ground wire onto the input side of the regulator. And then we're going to need to wire up this servo wire so that the servo can get power from the output side of the regulator. The color coding on this plug is not exactly ideal, but I think I can interpret it. The white wire is surely the signal wire. On these 3-pin servo plugs, the center wire is always power, and that means that this black wire is probably ground. So that's what we're going to assume. We're going to cut that and we're going to solder it up. And here's the result. The regulator is all wired up. And lastly, we will put some heat shrink, or in my case, I'm using Kapton tape. In a lot of cases, I find it just a little more convenient to use than heat shrink to electrically isolate the. There you go. Perfect. And we just tuck that down in there. And it's good to go. Next, we need to figure out where to put the servo's signal wire on the flight controller. Here in the iNav mixer screen, I'm going to scroll down and I want you to take a look at the output mapping. Notice that we have 4 motors defined and nothing else. And I'm going to go down to the servo mixer section and click Add New Mixer rule. And that's going to add a new servo to this aircraft. And when I do that, you see that servo has appeared here in the output mapping. And these right here, S1, S2, S3, S4, those are our motor outputs. The S stands for signal, signal 1, 2, 3, and 4. And notice that servo 1 has been mapped to S5. What is S5? If we go back to our flight controller pinout, we can see that there are 5 motor outputs here, M5, 6, 7, and 8, and S5 is M5, motor 5, signal 5. If you've been doing this long enough, you figure out that those two things mean the same thing. We're going to solder our signal wire to M5. Now, there are a few other configuration things we're going to need to do with this servo before we're done. So we're going to come back to iNav later, but we kind of need to have a working servo at that point. So let's just put that on hold for now and go solder it up and actually get ourselves like a working servo. Now that I've got the signal wire hooked up, how can I test that the servo works? I'm going to need to configure my radio to actually output a signal to that servo. And this is not going to be the complete radio setup. The actual radio setup is a little bit more complicated. It's going to involve a head tracker and some other things. But for now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up so that this knob controls the output of an aux channel that I will then route to the servo. I'm kind of regretting having a Radiomaster Boxer for the first time, well, literally for the first time, because the TX16S has some side sliders, they're just little sliders here on the side that are super accessible while you're flying, and they're really great for this purpose, but it is what it is. To set that up, I'm going to press the model key, then I'm going to page to the mixer screen. I'm going to scroll down to an unused aux channel. In this case, it is going to be channel 10. Great. I have still 10, 11, and 12. I have 3 more aux channels to play with. I'm going to choose channel 10. I'm going to click the jog wheel 1 time. I'm going to go down to source. I'm going to click the jog wheel 1 time. And then I'm going to twist that knob, and it will pick up S1 as the knob that I turned. You may have noticed that S1 is also controlling the brightness of my backlight. S1 is going to be doing double duty for this purpose. So now the knob S1 is controlling the output of that channel. Hang on. There we go. Yeah, we can see that channel moving as I turn that knob. Next, we'll go back to the mixer screen, and here in the servo mixer, we'll define the input for that servo as RC channel 10. And that should mean that when we turn that knob, the servo moves. Let's find out. Yes, that's exactly what we want. We now have a working servo. We know that the flight controller can talk to the servo. We know that the hand controller can talk to the servo. At this point, I feel comfortable buttoning the whole thing up, and then we'll come to the rest of the programming later in the video. I had hoped at this point to just really quick button all this up and be able to demonstrate it working. And unfortunately, I've hit a stumbling block. And that is that the stock cable that comes on the camera, the O3 camera, is, it looks like it's plenty long, doesn't it? But if you actually hook this all up and you see how it's got to come, it's not long enough. 300 millimeters. It does exist. It does exist. 300 millimeters exists. It's just out of stock. Come on, baby. Come on, baby. Yes! Yes, 300 millimeters. That's 100 more millimeters. That's 10 centimeters. That's got to be enough. It is now weeks later. I have ordered the correct longer cable, and I'm going to install it on the drone. And I got to tell you, I'm tempted to leave this part out because this isn't strictly part of the Medlin drone gimbal, but a lot of people who are installing this will have to do this. So I'm going to leave it in. And the first thing I'm going to do is just remove these screws from the back of the air unit. And then there is a little cover, a / retention bar that pops off. And then the MIPI connector will just lift away like that. And then we'll just pull it out here. I can slide it. Oh, it's not going to go through. iFlight. I don't want to be annoyed at you for taking the time to neatly route your wires and stuff, but also what a pain in the ass it is to maintain this thing. This is like working on a freaking German car. Oh, you would like to change the oil filter? Well, I hope you have this special oil filter changing wrench. Now, to begin, you will jack the car up and you will remove the transmission. Behind the transmission, you will find the oil filter. Now, I know it's possible to change the camera cable, but I don't know how. And instead of looking up instructions, I see a screw. I'm going to take the screw out. Let's just see what happens. Seems promising. Hey! All right, so that slides off, and now this pops off clearly. I got this little pass-through here. Really unclear to me how that works, but let's try. So it pops out by pushing it. Oh, there we go. Pushing it from the inside, it pops out. And now, I hope, pass this old cable out. We'll keep that cable because there's nothing wrong with it. The new cable has 2 sides. This side goes in the camera. This side goes on the air unit. If you're a smarter man than me, you will test it before you screw the back on to make sure that the camera works. And like it's not, a lot of times you'll think you have it plugged in, but it'll turn out it's not like fully seated, and then the camera won't work. But I'm just going to YOLO. And it's going to be hard for me to show you this, but then the cable snaps back onto the MIPI connector on the air unit, and it screws all back together. The next thing I got to do is I have to put the drive belt back on the mechanism. And in order to do that, I'm going to need to power up the servo. And the reason for that is that when I put the drive belt back on, I'm going to need to set the position of the gimbal. And if I don't know whether the gear is sort of all the way to the left or all the way to the right, I won't be able to do that correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the knob on my controller. That's backwards, so that's up. And that's forwards, so that's down. I'm going to turn this to all the way to the forward position, and that will be the lowest position that the gimbal can go to. Is that right? Have I done this wrong? That doesn't seem right. That's not right. If I put the servo in backwards, haven't I?
Telemetry lost.
The plug goes in the front. Dagnabbit. It's always something. And I don't really have to worry too much about the position here because I can just sort of hold that roughly in place and push this belt back on. What the Medlin drone gimbal instructions say is that an advantage of the belt compared to the traditional push rod is that if you crash and like the gimbal goes out of alignment, you can just grab it and slip it a little bit and put it where you want it. So you don't really need it to be exactly precise. What you do need though is you're just going to turn this. Okay. And we'll look at how much, that's a lot of movement. Okay. How about all the way down? Oh, wow. Like you get the entire swing. And if you're offset, if you're not quite lined up right, just the servo itself will set itself. Beautiful. Oh, perfect. That's really well designed. I'm going to guess that Medlin has designed the size of these gears to exactly give the amount of throw that he wants. That's the kind of smart thing that he would have done. Cool. Oh, and I got to put this screw back in. I'm not sure what the official way to get this bar back in is, but it seems to me like what works well is to take this screw out a little bit, push the bar in sort of crooked, and then screw the screw down, and it will sort of go back into place and tension itself. Oops, slipping there. Yeah. And then everything. Now it's going to be tighter and it's not going to slip as much. Then I have to mount the camera and see. Oh, that should be super, super easy because we just have all these little holes here. So we're just going to press the camera in to position and then find the screw holes that most closely match up and then just put a standard set of screws in. Voila. Oh, there we go. Ta-da! It's done. Actually, it's not done. There's one more step that you have to do in order to get the most out of the Medlin gimbal, and I'm going to tell you what it is just as soon as I tell you about my Patreon. Patreon is the single best way to support the work that I do on my channel. YouTube ad revenue and affiliate revenue, they come and they go. They're up and they're down. But Patreon is a reliable source of income that I can count on. When you sign up to Patreon, you're essentially subscribing to me for as little as $2 a month. Would you pay $2 a month for the value that you get out of my channel? If the answer to that is yes, there's a link in the video description below where you can sign up to my Patreon. And if I haven't earned $2 a month, wow, that number hasn't gone up in a long time. $2 isn't worth as much as it used to. I got to raise it. It should be like $4. It was $2 in 2019. Never mind. If I'm not worth $2 to you yet, I'm going to keep trying to earn it. And if I'm worth more than $2 to you, hey, you can sign up at any value you want. Just whatever value you get from my content, pick a number, head to the link in the video description below and sign up. If you do, mostly what you'll get is the good feeling of supporting the work that I do here. Yay, good for me, good for you. we're so happy. But also you'll get access to my Discord server, which is full of a whole bunch of other friendly, helpful patrons of mine who would love to talk about FPV, help you solve your problems, and a bunch of other good stuff. Link is down below. On with the video. So the piece of the puzzle that's missing right now is this. Right now, I can turn this knob on my controller and it controls the angle of the gimbal, but you can see the reasons why that's not ideal. If I'm in the middle of chasing a car and I need a little more up tilt, or I have to slow down and I need a little less up tilt, I don't want to be taking my hands off the controls to reach over and turn a knob in order to change the angle. And even if you were to say, well, Josh, I have a TX16S, it has side sliders, and it's pretty easy to manipulate the side sliders while you're flying. Is it? Is it pretty easy? No. The way to really get the most out of the Medlin gimbal is with a head tracker. And the way a head tracker works is that as you move your head up and down, the gimbal moves up and down with it, and then you can use your hands to fly and your head to aim the gimbal, and you can get these amazing smooth shots that the Medlin drone gimbal is known for doing. But this video isn't going to tell you how to set that up because I already set the head tracker up in a previous video and literally nothing has changed. I wanted in this video to, number one, show you guys the new gear mechanism, the belt mechanism, and number two, to actually install this on my drone instead of having Josh Medlin send me a drone with one pre-installed on it like he did for my previous video. Thank you, Josh. So that I have accomplished. But you should, and I, are going to go on, we're going to watch that old video, and we're going to set the head tracker up, and then we will really get the most out of this gimbal. Here's a card on screen and a link in the video description below to where you can check that out. As well, don't forget that you can buy all this stuff at Medlin's website, which is also linked in the video description below. See you there.